Now a 10 News Special Edition. Your voice, your vote.
Thank you for joining us for this special debate of the issues surrounding Proposition C, the proposed Chargers Stadium initiative. And this forum is presented by 10 News and our media partner 600 Kogo News Radio. I'm Kimberly Hunt, and let's begin with a closer look at owned downtown football stadium and convention center project next to Petco Park. The team and the NFL combined will contribute $650 million to the $1.8 billion project, and the Chargers will make a 30-year commitment to stay in San Diego. The city would raise $1.15 billion by selling bonds that would be paid for with the higher hotel taxes. Of that $1.15 billion, $350 million helps pay for the football stadium, $600 million pays for the adjoining convention center, and $200 million pays for the land. Prop C requires a 2/3 majority to pass. And joining me now are former Chargers reporter and stadium activist Dan McLellan, representing Yes on C, and San Diego City Councilman Chris Cate here on behalf of the No on C campaign. Thank you both for joining us. We want to start out just so we lay the groundwork with 1 minute apiece to just state your cases. So Dan, we're going to go first. Why support Prop C in 1 minute?
Well, it does three things. One, it provides $800 million for a much-needed, non-contiguous expansion of our convention center. That's 385,000 square feet of convention space that Comic-Con can use to expand and to invite new conventions. Two, it provides $350 million worth of funding, the same funding that the mayor proposed in terms of general fund money, but now we're using out-of-town money to build a stadium. About $150 million of that would go towards the construction costs, with the Chargers putting in another $650 million. And then $200 million would go for land and other costs. And third critical thing it does is it legalizes our tourism and marketing district tax, which was a tax that we used to advertise San Diego with, but it was never voted on by the citizens. So it's likely highly illegal. And there's a new lawsuit threatening this tax, which is going to ask for full reimbursement plus a 3 times penalty. So that is a growing liability to our city of over $10 million a month to our general fund. But by passing Prop C, we will legalize that tax and put a cap to that growing liability.
And Chris, in the next half hour, you'll definitely give your opinions on things. But for right now, just why vote no on Prop C?
In a word, it's the risk. It's the risk to the city. Under this measure that was crafted by the Chargers and by Dean Spanos without any public input whatsoever by the city or the surrounding neighborhoods and neighbors who live in that area, we're going to be saddled as a city with over $2 billion in debt to pay for this stadium. We have no revenue that will be generated from hosting of other events in the stadium, and we want to make sure that this risk is not placed squarely on the back of taxpayers.
We're going to get into the questioning now, and let's start with the bigger economic issue, what everyone cares about, what is good economically for the city of San Diego. And the competing economic studies are confusing. The Chargers say it would be a boon for the city. Tourism and some other studies that have come out don't agree with that. Chris, we're going to start with you, but why isn't this great for the city?
Economists agree, and there has been no economic study that has been done that shows that publicly subsidizing a stadium will have a positive economic impact to that agency or to that jurisdiction. What we want to make sure of, though, as I talked about before, about risk, when we're looking at the stadium and renting out the stadium for events, because that's what has been publicized as Final Fours or other events, concerts, things of that sort. The way that this measure was drafted is that all of that revenue that comes from those events do not come to the city in no way, shape, or form. And so we're going to be owning this facility as a city, but we're not going to be able to maximize off any of the revenues from events that occur in that stadium.
And specifically on this economic issue, Dan, why do you disagree with that?
Well, they really don't have a report that really reflects what this plan is. They did a report on a couple 100,000 square feet convention center expansion. They went out and they talked to their current clients and asked them, what would you like? They didn't speak to the industry as a whole, and they didn't do a report on 385,000 square feet of convention space, so there really isn't a competing report that looks at this specifically. And what I would add to this is that Chris agrees with this, all city council members, is that we need a stadium and we need a convention center. And the cheapest way to do that is to build these two things together because it saves about $200 million in construction cost. Ultimately, there's a cap on how much private money that's going to come into that. So every single dollar that you save in construction cost is ultimately tax savings.
Isn't this good for tourism in general? Dan, you go first.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to add in the first 10 years about 1.85 million new room nights a year, or 1.85 million over a 10-year period. And this is how you do it. If you have a contiguous expansion of the convention center space, meaning connected to, typically if you have a convention that maybe lasts 3 or 4 days, it takes that space up for a week because there's a load-in period and a load-out period. With this non-contiguous space, you can have one convention going on while the other convention is setting up, and they can go back and forth between the two, and that will keep more people in more hotel rooms. Plus, we're going to build additional hotel rooms to accommodate new tourists.
Chris, its impact on tourism.
I don't think it has that positive impact on it because one of the things that this measure does, it reduces by half the amount of money that we dedicate to marketing of San Diego. Right now, we spend about $30 million to market San Diego annually. We are competing with cities up and down the West Coast and on the western side of the country for that business. Las Vegas alone dedicates $200 million a year to marketing San Diego. So while we're increasing taxes on our tourists, we're also reducing the amount of money that we use to promote San Diego. Additionally, on the cost, and while the private contribution to this facility is capped, the public contribution is not capped. There are so many unknowns when it comes to constructing this facility, whether it's how much it's going to cost to relocate the MTS bus yard and mitigate everything that comes with that property, or to replace tailgate or replace parking at Tailgate Park that we are on the hook for as a city. These are costs that are absolutely unknown, but we are responsible for as taxpayers.
And you brought up some of the things and the reasons that you have opposed it, some of the loopholes you're talking about. Dan, what is your response to some of the specifics that Chris has mentioned in terms of risk to the city with the MTS bus yard and the different things?
Well, first of all, there is no future vision for San Diego that has the MTS bus yard where it is. So the cheapest ability to move it is right now, today. You move out in the future, it becomes more expensive. So we need to tackle that project immediately so we can do it as cheaply as possible. I think we also need to understand the history of how Tailgate Park was created. It was created to fulfill a $30 million funding gap for Petco Park. But at the time, it was known that that was going to be a temporary space because that site had already been identified for the next expansion of the convention center, because in the mid-90s, a contiguous expansion had been negotiated away and everybody knew there was going to be a non-contiguous expansion. In fact, there was actually a bridge that was built for that, and in Prop C provides 1,300 new parking spaces where the Tailgate Park is only about 1,000 spaces. There's more parking spaces created than lost.
I want to give you a minute to respond, and then we'll go on to the next question.
Well, the 1,300 parking spaces is for the entire facility in general. That's not to replace Tailgate Park. And Fred Nass, the advisor for the Chargers, also said publicly that the cost to replace Tailgate Park is north of $50 million, that the city, based on our lease, is on the hook for. Now, I agree that, yes, at some point in time, MTS bus yard is going to have to leave, have to be replaced. The Tailgate Park will have to be developed and replaced as well, too. But the risk for all of this falls back to the city and the taxpayers. And that's where I have the concerns, because we are going to build a project and facility without any costs, without any designs, anything that would have to go forward on a major infrastructure projects. Voters and taxpayers have no idea what they're getting.
Voters are very concerned about risks, Dan. So when people are making this very important decision, what are the things that you believe come back to the taxpayer and the citizens of San Diego that are actually a benefit?
Well, I'll talk about the TMD in the beginning. The biggest risk here is to do nothing, because everybody knows the TMD tax is an illegal tax. It's not a fee. It is collected like a tax. The industry identifies it like a tax, and it was raised without a public vote, and that is illegal. So that's creating a growing liability to the general fund. If we legalize the TMD tax, what Prop C does, that caps that liability, and that's over $10 million a month of growth in that liability.
Okay, we have stepped into an issue, and some of it concerns a side letter that the mayor of San Diego, Kevin Faulconer, made with the Chargers, and after several concessions, he then got on board as a supporter. So we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to look at those concessions. We're going to look at the concerns you have over that side letter, and Dan, why you think that that plugs some of the holes that we've been talking about. We'll be right back. And welcome back to this 10 News KOGO News Radio special forum on Measure C. San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer is supporting Prop C after negotiating concessions from the Chargers. The team agreed in a side letter to give the city all of the revenue from the non-NFL events at the new stadium, commit to staying in San Diego until the initial debt on the project is fully paid off, reimburse the city for all preliminary costs if the team leaves San Diego before construction begins, replace parking that the Padres would lose at Tailgate Park, and address quality of life issues that have been raised by downtown groups. So now we go back to our panelists right now. We're going to start with you, Chris Cate, because you know of this side letter. You know of the concessions that the Chargers have agreed to. Why is this not good enough?
Well, I appreciate the work by Mayor Faulconer and what he's done. He's very committed to this issue and has been since he got elected. But unfortunately, I think the process that undertook to put this measure on the ballot, this letter exposes the flaws within that process. These are all issues that could have been addressed during the negotiation process, during the crafting of the initiative. The letter that was agreed to by Mr. Spanos and Mayor Faulconer has no legal authority whatsoever. The language is a language within the initiative. That's the law. And unfortunately, the precedent that this agreement would set, should the measure pass and it be implemented, would essentially be undoing the will of the voters.
I'm going to ask you a quick question,
Sure.
then we will give you a chance to respond, Dan. But just yesterday on radio, Fred Mass was talking about this very issue, and there was some new information that shocked a lot of people that didn't know, and I want your response to this because I think people now are wondering. When asked about the side letter and the fact that it isn't enforceable, he was saying nothing in the initiative binds the team. In fact, the team's not mentioned in all 119 pages, and there will be a governing board that the city puts together to then start from ground zero. And if the Chargers can't get these things in place, MTS bus yard, etc., that the TOT would revert to 13.5 and the general fund would get a penny, would add a penny to the general fund. Information a lot of people didn't know buried in this 119 pages. Yeah. You know about it, so
yes.
Let's get a response to that.
So that's part of the issues that I think I have with the initiative and why this should have been all negotiated prior to. First off, there is no requirement at all that a joint powers authority or governing body be created. The language does not say that. The language does not mandate that creation. Secondly, I also heard that radio interview in which he stated that, well, opponents should be smarter and state that, well, we really want the Chargers to leave, so we should support Measure C to have it pass and then try to block this after the back end. I really take issue with that because we don't want the Chargers to leave, first and foremost. We do not want the team to leave. We want a stadium and a construction of a stadium that is in the best interest of both the Chargers and taxpayers. And so I think that if this measure were to fail, again, all we're asking for is to go back and renegotiate with this team.
And Dan, you know about the concession letter, you know about everything that's in it, and yet you say, let's support Measure C. Let's tell the Chargers that we want to start at ground zero and try to work something out, get this governing body in the city and the Chargers to all come together. Tell us why, the benefits and why you want it passed.
Well, if you actually read the proposition, you might come to the conclusion that it really wasn't much of a concession letter at all, that most of the stuff that are quote-unquote concessions are actually clearly written into the proposition. I did have an opportunity to speak to Mayor Faulconer about this about a week ago and say, how do you enforce this? And he said, well, it is my word, it's out in the public, and I guarantee you that if these are not met, that this project does not go forward.
All right, Dan, I'm not going to cut you off because I know you haven't had your time. So we're going to take a quick break right now, but when we come back, you have a list of things and reasons why you believe this is beneficial for the city. We're going to give you that time to say it. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to a discussion on Proposition C. City Councilman Chris Cate and sports activist Dan McLellan speaking right now against and for Prop C, giving the reasons for Prop C. Dan, go.
For years, we've been trying to deal with our convention center expansion and for our stadium. And as we've waited, trying to get a plan, the cost to being able to do business has gone up and up and up. Meanwhile, we've had 2 illegal taxes where the public was disenfranchised. We attempted to expand the convention center contiguously by raising the TOT 3% and never putting it to a public vote. That turned out to be highly illegal. The same reason for the TMD tax, which was never voted on by the public, is also highly illegal. Now it's time for the public to actually vote after all of these years and to take control of this issue and put forth a solution that saves taxpayers' dollars. By combining these 2 things, the convention center and the convention center, or the convention center and the stadium, we save over $200 million in construction costs. That's savings that goes to the taxpayers, and we save knowing that interest rates are low now. If we put this issue off further, interest rates will probably likely go up. Who knows what the future holds? Plus, the cost of doing business goes up. Let's finally solve these problems and vote yes on C.
And Chris, is this somehow a referendum on the team and on ownership, especially in light of a lot of people upset when clearly the Spanos tried to go to Carson, and now the Prop C here? Let's all come together and have a relationship and build a stadium and a convention center. Is part of it referendum?
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I mean, at least from my standpoint, no. I don't think the No on C campaign is doing this out of spite of ownership for what occurred last year at all. I think what we're looking at it and how I'm looking at it is from what is in the best interest of taxpayers. And my hope would have been that when we started this process following the vote by the NFL, that the team would have been more inclusive of outreaching to not only council members, but surrounding neighborhoods, the people who live in East Village, and really understanding what their concerns are. When you don't even have the support of the Padres, who are directly across the street and would be majorly impacted by this development, I think that says something, that we should be going out and having more discussions about what to do next. And I think that if that would have occurred, we would have been supportive of an initiative and a vote of the people, especially if it did require 2/3 of the people to support it. We would all have been on the same coalition, the same campaign, and done that. And that's what I've been trying to speak about. I've met with folks from Save Our Bolts and the Stadium Coalition to express my concerns. And again, that's my hope after November 8th, that we're able to go back to the table and have that type of discussion.
When you talk about going back, though, Dan, you've been very vocal that going back to Mission Valley and the idea of a continuous thank you. All right, we all win the prize. Convention center downtown probably isn't viable.
It's not viable because it's vastly more expensive. Despite what you heard last year about the city owning the land in Mission Valley, it's simply not true. 80 of the acres there is actually owned by the Water District. Jan Goldsmith has made it very clear that you need to fairly compensate the Water District for their land. The last valuation we have on that land was actually provided by CSAG, where they valued it $3 million an acre. So either A, buy it for $240 million from them, lease it, which would be probably twice that over a 30-year period, or do some sort of land swap. And I don't think there's a piece of land that San Diego residents are willing to give up that's worth $240 million. Plus, the draft EIR that the mayor did on Mission Valley came back that there's 920,000 cubic yards of contaminated dirt that would need to be exported. And it named organochlorine pesticide as the contaminant. So it's not necessarily the fuel there. There's pesticide, which is either the city or water district land, becomes a taxpayer's expense.
Huge issues with Mission Valley. We know Chris has some comments on that. He is going to get it. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, you'll get that chance and you'll have some final thoughts to be able to wrap up anything in this discussion that you felt you wanted to say. You'll be able to say it. We'll be right back. With closing remarks, we begin with Councilman Chris Cate.
Well, to address a couple of the points that Dan mentioned. First off, the TMD has not been ruled illegal. The tourism marketing district is legal as it stands today. There's been no lawsuits or judgments by a judge or a court that says otherwise. Additionally, when it comes to Mission Valley, the city and the water department, which are both part of the city, own the entire acreage of land. All we are asking for after November 8th, should this measure fail, is an opportunity to have a dialogue and a discussion with the chargers between the city, elected officials, the team, to figure out what is the best deal for both sides, whether that's downtown or Mission Valley. Both of those things could be addressed. But we want to work with as many stakeholders as possible because this impacts all of San Diego, not just the team, not just the city as an agency, but all the neighborhoods and everyone throughout the county.
And Dan, your closing remarks.
I got to respond to the TMD. There is a new pressing lawsuit that's on the horizon there that Chris is aware of. So that is a huge issue that faces. This brings us into the cost of doing nothing. To do nothing means that we're creating a liability with this TMD that's growing at $10 million a month. To do nothing means that we're putting a solution out in the future when interest rates get higher, the cost of business continues to rise. Solve this problem now where it's the cheapest by combining two facilities, save $200 million in construction cost, and let's move forward. This stadium debate has dominated our news. And while it's been great to talk about, let's talk about fixing roads and all the other issues that face San Diego. And we can do that once we get beyond these issues of the stadium and convention center.
Thank you both for coming to speak about Prop C. We appreciate your time. And we want to thank both of them, Dan McLellan and Chris Cate, for shedding more light on Measure C. A reminder that 10 News is your complete source for election news and resources. You can find much more on Measure C. Go to our website, 10news.com. Under the Spotlight section, right there, click Your Voice, Your Vote. You can also find quick links to register to vote. You can vote by mail. You can find your polling place there. Also join 10 News and ABC News on election night for complete live coverage. Thanks for joining us.